Hi, welcome to the podcast, Inspired Conversations with Coaches, podcast where I share interviews with heart-centered coaches to inspire you to unlock your true self so you have a truly wonderful life. I'm your host, Scott Campbell, a mentor, coach, and trainer to coaches. I show coaches how to get clients quickly, how to build and scale their coaching business by creating clarity through simplicity. If you're struggling with growing your coaching business, if you comment the word ebook, we'll get across to you a free ebook, which is all about how to get paying clients quickly. It's a proven three-step blueprint in the ebook that you can implement quickly. Now, let's get to the interview. My guest today is IAN COLPMAN. Now, IAN is a burnout coach. He helps people overcome burnout by decreasing stress, boosting energy, and creating a balanced work-life dynamic using specialized coaching and practical techniques. Today's conversation was all about balancing work and life. It's an amazing conversation. Go to it now and hope you enjoy. If you want to get in touch with Ian, his details will be in the description, his LinkedIn and his email where you can get in touch with Ian if you want to wear. And then likewise, if you have any questions or thoughts about the show or bits you love and bits you found valuable, please comment below wherever you're watching this, as it helps everyone and it helps this podcast get out and this conversation get out to more people. Hope you enjoy. Let's go to the interview right now. Hey, so welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Scott.
So I've done the intro about you as a burnout coach and really helping people sort of decreasing their stress and the boosting their energy.
Yeah,
And this podcast topic, we're going to very much talk about balancing work and life,
yeah.
which I think will just appeal to so many people. Uh,
Mm,
really want to kind of start with this and around what does a healthy work-life balance mean? And obviously to you and how individuals can define it themselves, because that work-life balance is used a lot, isn't it? And thrown out
yeah.
there a lot. So I
It-
think we
it-
can start is what does a healthy work-life balance actually mean to you?
right. So I think that's something that society as a whole has a view on, but actually needs to be defined individually for each person, because it will have a big difference depending on what season of your life you're in. If
Mm,
you're new out of college or university working, you're in a different position in your life to where you are if you're in your 30s and 40s with children, or if you're older and your children are starting to rely on you less. So what you choose in terms of the balance is very different and will also be affected by your own personal circumstances. So
mm,
my thoughts on that really is that you ought to dedicate some time to think about what a work-life balance means to you personally, and then to discuss that with your partner, assuming you have one, and make sure that there's a good understanding between the two of you about how you're going to manage your careers and your home life. And that way you can build that appreciation of where you're going to be working, where you're going to be at home, without any false assumptions being made, because it's very easy to make assumptions, and being a little stereotypical, particularly on the man. I'm off earning all this, I'm doing this for my family, and it almost becomes a self-justification for being far too much on the work side than the life side, because it's not really what your family want.
mm,
Um, but in your head you're going, I'm doing this for you, and it's not actually true. You're doing it because it's your career and because that's what's important to you, um, and maybe because you haven't thought about the other aspects too much. But having that opportunity to spend some time with your partner, to prioritize where you know that you're going to be working hard for a particular period of time or a project or whatever, making sure that you've got good communication in place.
mm,
So you're not all of a sudden, coming home an hour or two late from work, or if you're working remotely, you're locked in your office all day.
mm.
Your partner knows what's going on and can react to that. Similar for them as well. There'll be times when your partner's doing something and suddenly you're the one thinking, well, I've clocked off work at 5 o'clock and I'm not seeing you till 8 o'clock.
And I suppose
So
that's becoming a little bit more apparent now, where the we won't go into it, but the cost of living crisis and stuff like that now we're
Mm,
having probably go over the lockdown thing from 4 years ago, that actually couples, the wife and the
mm,
husband are both working now, or
yeah,
some reverse where the wife is out to work and the thing. So the life has changed like that a lot, hasn't it, as well? So
it certainly has. I mean, no, from my own personal experience, I work predominantly remotely now, so I'm at home 4 days a week, in the office 1 day a week, and it's a very different work structure to previously, where I would have been in the office 4 or 5 days a week. You know, commuting has changed, the roles in the family has changed as a result of that. You now got much more shared responsibilities compared to traditional roles, and that's even more apparent where you have children as well. So I think um, one of the things that has really changed in terms of work and life, and rather than balance in terms of integration, is the ability to work from home, and also therefore the ability for work to put demands on you when you're at home. Um, I know it's something that I found during COVID in particular, when we were just getting used to this style of working, that it became routine for meetings to be dropped in at 8 a.m. because that's when you would be commuting. So that's legitimate work time.
mm.
But actually, that turned out to be good family time for getting things set up in the home.
Mm.
Or, you know, if you're not going home in the evening, again, you can push longer, and work tended to stretch to fill the time available, rather than being controlled in a more reasonable manner, as it probably was in the office. And I think that's particularly the case where you've got both parents, or both people in a partnership at home at the same time. Um, you're both subject to those demands, and yet literally you're in the same house but perhaps not communicating, because I'm in one room doing meetings with my team, and my partner's in her office doing meetings with her team. Whereas actually it's much better if you put a few boundaries in place and go, right, it's 12 o'clock, we're going to go and have lunch together. And you have that ability then to work together as a couple, and you're getting new opportunities that you perhaps wouldn't have had, you know,
I
before we
must admit
started.
something I put myself, because when it's interesting that when the lockdown sort of kind of first started, there was something about it that I felt it was um it was going to go on for a longer time. You know, a lot of people were saying that, 6 weeks it'd be back to normal. There was something
Yeah.
about it after even about a week and a half, and I even went on a sort of kind of a group podcast thing where I said
Mm.
this and I got absolutely slated, sort of by it. Um, but interestingly, that first couple of weeks, I mean, because prior to that, for me, it's interesting work-life balance when I look at it from my own perspective, because
Mm.
the there's been different times. There's been a corporate life that I've had where
Yeah.
it was completely 90% work, 10% life, and I told myself that story about I was doing it for my family,
Yeah.
and and work was definitely a priority, because if something come up in work that was like, right, that's happening, I'm going to be back late because I'm doing
Mm.
this. So it was always that, and then it got to the point where I was working for myself, but even that initially went completely work, because it's then well, I've got to get, there was, money in the thing, I've got, working for myself, and
Yeah.
I've got other things I'm doing that I never used to do before from an admin perspective and stuff like that. Um, and then the traveling into London sort of 3 times a week to meet clients and stuff like that. But then when it went to lockdown and they had that couple of weeks where I think everyone was doing it, it's like trying to find a laptop, trying to find a space in the house to hold the meetings.
Yeah.
Uh, and and because the kids were in the house and stuff like that as well, that
Mm.
for them to understand that was difficult. I mean, I built this garden office, and the
Mm.
3 weeks into that first lockdown, it's probably the best thing I've ever done, because it was an easy set boundary. Like, now the doors
Yeah.
closed. Um, I'm on a call, and they so it was a really easy boundary to set in.
Mm.
But that has allowed me something that we put in place as a family, was that when the kids went back to school, in particular, I had a homeschooled we had one child still at home, homeschooled,
Yeah.
and one in primary school. And
Mm.
I very much put the balance around, I don't take any meetings before 11 o'clock in the morning so that I can be there for Leah at the
Yeah.
primary school, but also around that pickup time in primary school and stuff like that. And that was the first time that I really understood work-life balance. I always had this,
Mm.
what I call media perception, which is what we've, kind
Yeah.
of told in a story we're telling. And that was the
Yeah.
first for me as a boundary I've really felt, well, actually, that this is what really work-life balance is, and like having, we don't do it so much now because we do it naturally, but we used to schedule in my, well, really good with my diary.
Yeah.
And we scheduled in, like lunch with Nicole, which is my wife, and coffee,
Yeah.
tea break with her, and that made a big difference.
Mm.
What are the what are the what are the biggest challenges, that people will face when trying to balance that work and life? That- And even from a single person, like there's a lot of people that might be, so I don't want to, like you said, don't want to stereotype something, but there'll be a lot of people as well that are living on their own, that are
Yeah.
coaches. I'm listening to this, that live on their own. They're a coach, obviously it's their work thing, which
Mm.
is all virtual.
Yeah.
Um, but there's still a balance they've got to do between what's work and what's life. Because if they do,
Absolutely. So regardless of your own circumstances, you always have to have that time to recharge for yourself. You need to have that time that those things that give you energy and excitement, whether that's golf or skydiving or whatever floats your individual boat, and that time with friends and family, to give you, the things that you want in life as well. Um, and I see it. If I think back to my corporate days, I see it much more with the youngest team members I had, who would be, far more willing to work late in the evenings during the week, but the weekends, that was their time.
mm,
So you had that clearer divide. Um, but it is important that whatever stage of life you are at, to have conscious choices you make as to, this is time I'm dedicating to my life, and I am not thinking about work during it. Because if you're, 7:30 at night, you just want to have your meal, glass of wine, watch telly, meet friends, but in your head you're replaying the meetings you've had, you're thinking about work that you've got to do tomorrow. You haven't switched off, and you
no,
need. And I think that's something that is perhaps a little harder for those people who are single, because the distractions, the things that keep you flowing in your work, in your home life, are not as easy to pick up as they are for married or people with children.
yeah,
Um, I think in those cases you probably have to be a little firmer on the boundary to say, right, it's this time, it's my time. I'm going to watch this thing and chat to my friends on Facebook whilst watching the program, or I'm during lockdown, when it was really difficult if you weren't in someone's bubble, but to have that level of communication so that you are still engaging in that social time, and the things that you can do as much as possible to give you a sense of purpose, a sense of freedom.
mm,
Um, Again, just thinking back to some of the young people I know, that it was sort of in a one bed flat, going out for a walk once a day, and the rest of the time it was work meetings, or in the evenings it would be, phone calls with your parents. It was not a very pleasant time to be in that environment on your own.
mm,
So having that clearer boundary to say, right, I'm putting work aside, and I'm going to chat to one of my friends. I've got some old friends from university I haven't spoken to for a while. I'll hit them up on Facebook, find out what they're up to. Just giving yourself that time, that flexibility to be more social, and to step out of the work role, I think is really important.
yeah. And Yeah, I agree with that. I think the important. And so why do so many people struggle then to achieve that balance, even though when they know it's important
Mm,
and they're telling themselves, but they're still struggling to implement it in place. They're still
yeah.
struggling to create that boundaries, that
So,
balance that they need.
I think it often comes down to the stories that we tell ourselves. And there are expectations in society about the way that we do things. So, you know, the expectation is you go to work, you do this role, and then that becomes the biggest element of your life. I know from my own personal experience, for many years prior to me moving into coaching, I would define myself by my job. Someone would ask me what tell me about yourself. I would start with, I'm a project manager.
Yeah.
And after that, I quickly would run out of things because that was 90% of my life.
Yeah.
Now I know that people don't want to hear about the projects I'm managing, so I leave that bit out, but it leaves you with that big gap. So you have these stories that you tell yourself about how you're supposed to act. But also, I think it's probably changing in society now, but certainly for my generation, you didn't really focus on yourself and what you wanted as much as is perhaps available to people now. So you go, well, what do you do? Well, I do this job. What do you do outside the job? Oh, well, when I've got some time, I do this hobby or whatever. Um, or I might chat with my friends. I might go to the pub, have a beer, or go out with my wife and have a meal or whatever. But you don't really sit down and think in the same way as you do in a structured environment. What do I want out of life? How am I trying to achieve that? What's giving me joy and purpose? How do I feel about it? Questions that as coaches we ask of our clients all the time, we tended not to ask ourselves, or certainly from my own perspective, earlier in my life. And I think it's quite a common thing. It's certainly something I've found with new clients, that when you ask them, yeah, what do you want in life? Why do you do the things you do? They don't have deep answers to them. It's something that you need to they need to develop. So I think in many cases, there's a lack of intention around what you want in your personal life. Means that you're simply not putting the effort in. And where you've got the much more structured side of work, and then you've got things that you allow to dominate, it pushes that boundary further and further. And the more you allow that boundary to be pushed, it then becomes a new boundary. So you go into a new job, and people are working till 6 p.m, so I'll work till 6 p.m. At 6 p.m, you've got a few things to finish off, so it's 6:30. And before you know it, 6:30 is the norm, and that's every day. And that's an hour and a half after your scheduled finish time. And if that's the norm, then you've got a bit of a problem. If you have to work extra when there's extra work and you can flex and balance, that's a different matter. But when
That's a
work,
conscious choice, isn't it? So
it
that's
is, yeah. But when it becomes the norm, you stop listening to your own intent and about what you want, and you just do it. And I think that's something which really needs to be addressed in society, about making us think more consciously about what we want as individuals, and then what we want collectively in our family groupings outside of work, so that we work towards that, and not just those. Our structured goals aren't just our work goals. Our structured goals are also family, health, personal achievements, travel, whatever it is that you're looking for.
yeah. So with a lot of the clients that you work with, particularly ones in like careers then in corporate
Yeah,
that work for that are employed, do do you find then that they're very clear on their career path,
yeah,
but not their personal why? Is that
yeah. That's, I would say, it's not in all cases, but that's a common thing. To be clear on the career path, that they want to achieve a certain thing. So I've worked with some people who are teachers, for example, and they love teaching, and some of them have aspirations to move up within that world. But that's all consuming certainly during term time anyway.
Yeah.
And their personal why gets left behind. And I see it in the corporate area as well. It's there's particularly if you're from a consulting background, you want to make a certain grade, whether that's a director or vice president or whatever, and you have your career path mapped out, and actually then it becomes a source of stress if you start to deviate from that career path, and you end up putting more and more in to try and bring yourself back, instead of reevaluating, is that really what I wanted? Do I want to put 90% of my effort into one set of goals I made when I was 24? Or do I want to think about the lifestyle I want, the time with my partner, my family, and other things that are interesting to me? And I think you can see it at the other end of the spectrum as well. When people retire, if work has been everything, then they struggle to move into retirement. Whereas if they've got a more balanced perspective, retirement becomes a joyful thing, because it's the things that they were doing part-time. Now they can step into more of it, whether that's extra time with their hobbies or leadership roles in their communities, the causes that are important to them or whatever. I just think, that there's lots of things people do around their work that they don't try and do around their personal life and their family life. And for me, one of the big elements really is just taking some of the strategies that you do. So I for example, like to sit down and do quarterly goals at home, just to check in as to the things I wanted to do. Do I change my lifestyle the same way as I did 6 months ago, a year ago? Have I suddenly realized that I'm spending a lot of time with my son, but perhaps not as much time with my wife? Other things, and if you reflect on it periodically, you go, that's changed. That's not quite the way I want it, and I can do something about it. If you allow it to drift, suddenly you're in a position where everything's gone in a direction different to where I want it.
Yeah.
And now it's harder to fix.
And you're not in control of it. It's controlling you.
Yeah.
So with conscious there'll be a lot of coaches watch this podcast. Obviously, I've connected to a lot of coaches. Yourself connect to a lot of coaches. It's interesting that in the coaching industry, knowing what your why is and stuff, it's quite a common thing, if you like, and people they might not say be really clear on it, but they kind of have worked on it. I mean, the vast majority of coaches have done that right from the start, and you don't normally come across a coach that hasn't heard of Simon Sinek with the start with why. So
of course, yeah.
But it's interesting having this conversation with you. That just something that come out into my head is that when I'm thinking over my head, a lot of coaches that have come across and my clients where what their why is, and a little bit like my own letter to myself why, if you like, it's a very work related, isn't it? It's like from a coach of wanting to make a big impact, the financial goals and stuff like that.
Yes.
Just thinking from this conversation we're having, actually, that really leans a lot towards a work and not a personal life. There is some that obviously, talk about they want to travel and stuff like that. I suppose that's the personal element coming with it, but vast majority talk about the impact and financial goals around the business, the coaching business and what they want to, how they want to grow their coaching business.
Yeah.
Is there something you find?
It is, and it's actually something I try and work with clients on, specifically around burnout, because quite a lot of people who come to me for burnout, what their stated goal is I want to get back to how I was before I was burnt out. But that's not what we try and achieve together. What we try and achieve together is a new, more balanced person who understands both their personal and professional goals and has the tools in place to make sure that one doesn't conflict too badly on the other. Because if you're burnt out and your goal is to get back to where you were, you're right at risk of being burnt out again for exactly the same reason. And you've not learnt from the experience. And that learning from it is a really important aspect, I find. So thinking about, well, this is why it happened. This is how I can protect myself and recover from that. But how do I move now to being a more growth-centered person who isn't going to put myself, not just not put myself in the same position, but is actually going to move towards something that I actively want. And yeah, that can be hobby related, that can be family related. It could be one day I'm going to be the captain of the golf club. It could be I've got an interest in steam trains. I'm going to volunteer at my local steam train, or whatever charity or interest you've got. You can be involved in that, and that's something that can grow through your life. Or if it's no longer serving you the way you want to, you can let it go. But having that personal why gives you that focus as to moving in towards something, as well as moving away from burnout or whatever it was that brought you to the coach.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Actually, it's a really good point. And so, is it, you talked about then about where they want to go back to where they before. So is it just trying to make the challenges and sort of struggles people might have? Is it too easy to fall into a past memory, a past story that we were telling ourselves then?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I again, I'm generalizing a little bit, but I deal in the corporate world typically with people with two different variations on the burnout story. One is someone who is on the fast track to the top, and all they want is to get back on that fast track with as little impact to how they're perceived as possible. So they don't want people knowing they've been burnt out. They don't want to take time off to recover, and they don't want to think about anything other than that one story.
Is there still a shame around the word burnout, do you think, in people?
I think a lot less than there was.
Yeah.
But I think there, still among people who want to be considered high flyers, then there's a perception that if I burnt out, I'm not as good as I thought. Perhaps not as good in other people's eyes as I would like them to think as well. And for people who fall into that category, again, I try and look at, was your original objective exactly what you really wanted? Because if you're going to focus on the work goal, let's focus on that, but make sure it is genuinely what you want, and you're not just doing it because it's what you thought you ought to do. The other category of people I find who come to me from burnout in a corporate environment are what you might call the more ordinary lower middle manager or workers, who just have demands placed on them more than they are able to cope with for whatever reason. Staff shortages, projects, more clients. They're not coping with the workload, and they're not pushing back in the way that they need to. And for that category,
but they have no boundaries, have they, then, around?
Exactly, yeah. So for that category, it's more, I find, making sure you can set up the boundaries to protect you and give yourself the structure to have the work life you want without it becoming overbearing in the way that it had done.
And so with that then, because then if you suffer from burnout, and is there a big piece around then mindset then? Because if you don't I suppose, deal with it internally then and set
Yeah,
yourself up for like, right, how do I not do this? How does this not happen again? That
yeah,
was me. I had it when I did. It's funny when I just
mm,
saw people in my corporate world burn out, and
mm,
that would never happen to me, it's that thing. And then it
yeah,
did at one point. And then I
yes,
think that it hit me hard enough in terms of took a lot, right, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to do that. And
mm,
got some mentoring and coaching around it at the time, even though I didn't actually really know what mentoring and coaching was at the time. It was interesting now look back, it was. But is there a big piece of then of mindset of people? Because some people go, right, because I've had burnout and now I need to throw myself completely into work because of them stories that they're telling themselves, them opinions they've got themselves.
yeah.
Um, is there a big piece then of mindset that they've got to go through to kind of look
I,
then at actually how to to set
mm,
boundaries to.
yeah, I think so. I what
It's easy, sorry, it's easy saying for us to set boundaries, set things really big,
yes,
but there's a strong mindset around doing that, isn't there? Around
there is.
yeah,
So I'll tell you the very first boundary I set for myself when I wrote these down as these are my boundaries, and it's I'll pay attention to how I feel and give myself permission to have boundaries.
right,
And I wrote that about 10 years ago after I'd been through burnout.
mm,
Um,
lovely,
and prior to that, I didn't give myself permission.
mm,
I accepted it without question. I can eat whilst at that meeting. If someone wanted something from me in the evening, if I got extra work, I would just do it because I thought that's what was expected of me. I didn't have those boundaries.
mm,
Um, so that first thing, really paying attention to yourself and giving yourself permission is the first step. And that, as you say, that comes down to mindset. Um, Part of that is down to how you value yourself, whether and at the time I had some low self-esteem issues because I just put myself into a work environment.
mm,
But having that opportunity to step back, having someone support you, and then thinking and building that mindset, those are tools that we don't usually get these days.
mm,
Um, some people have an advantage that they can do that for themselves, or it's become a conditioned response because of the way that they operate. But for many people, that's simply not something that's ever been in their reality, and therefore some mindset work to help them understand what they need to do in terms of pushing back.
yeah,
A big one, and I know you're going to be talking to another coach around this, is learning to say no.
mm,
Uh, yeah, saying no to someone in authority over you can feel very difficult, but sometimes you have to. It's the right thing for you, but it's also the right thing for them.
mm,
Because if you continually take on things that you're not able to deliver because you're too overloaded, you're overwhelmed in a different way, or it's just beyond your capability, not only are you doing yourself a disfavor, you're doing a disfavor to anyone who's relying on you.
mm, yeah. I mean, a
Uh,
big one for me that's it's been the about 4.5 years ago, I joined the program and the around not being attached to the outcome, and it's just such a huge thing that's come out probably on a daily basis and people I work with is that we kind of convince ourselves of what like, oh, I want to have a conversation with my boss, but I know how he's going to react and stuff like that. So they've already
yeah,
kind of gone, well, this is and created that outcome away. And obviously we create our own reality. We won't delve into that too much in this one,
yeah,
but the, but when you kind of not attach to that outcome, you can go, well, actually, he can, if I had this conversation with my boss, he could either say this, he could say that, he could say that, and there's probably 5 or 6 different outcomes that could probably happen.
yeah,
And I'll let that play out and deal with whatever, react to
mm,
whatever then their reaction is.
yeah,
It frees up. I think that was a big one for me in terms of not just having that conversation with people and not just being attacked, not already prejudging what the outcome was going to be, and just being, you know, knowing that I've got to have this conversation with this person,
Yeah.
and it might not be a good conversation. It might not be agreed. You know, there was one of if I give it a live example, I got sort of involved in a project that I brought to the table and brought, you know, someone else in and said this would be good for us as a project, and it become too consuming. There was not enough output coming out of it.
Yeah.
And it was very, yeah, for time wise wasn't great. And it was sitting with me where I knew it, thinking about it, where I knew I had to come out, but I had to pull myself out of the situation, had to say, no, look, this is not working for me.
Yeah.
And I lived with it a little bit, and it kept thinking about it, so I knew I had to deal with it. And then it was all the things that played out. Like there's this person actually, yeah, if I do that, then that's going to put the friendship that I had with this person in jeopardy. How,
Mm.
because you know how they're going to react, and there's always, and then it's up that sort of played out in my head, and then it's like living with it for a couple of days, it was still on my mind a lot. So I need to deal with
Yeah.
it. I just need to deal with whatever the reaction will be, the reaction.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a particularly great reaction from them, but I knew that, look, hey, we'll deal with that, and then, you know, in time it'll be okay, you know.
Mm.
And as a result, you know, took about 3 months, but then kind of my friendship was back to what it
Yeah.
was. Um, but that's a difficult one, isn't it, for people, especially if it's their boss, I suppose. And
Yeah.
but that kind of, yeah, like you said, you know, that dealing with it, and kind of setting the boundaries in
It,
place.
it's a difficult one, especially with your boss.
Mm,
But often having those difficult conversations is what propels you to something better.
mm,
Um, yeah, it's a solution to your problem. And if I again relate back to my own personal experience, I was in a project role about 12 or 13 years ago, where the demands from the client were just far too much for me to handle. I was working 12, 13 hours a day, and it was really, really driving me down.
mm,
And I spoke to my boss about this, and her response was, "I'm really glad you've talked to me about it." Firstly, she related a bit of her own personal experience, but
mm,
secondly, she said, if this fails because we're overloading you, it looks bad on everybody. So what we'll do is work out how you define what support you need,
mm,
and then we'll see a way of trying to get that for you. And now I didn't get everything I wanted, but I did get some support. They brought in a junior person to pick up some of the admin tasks from me. You know, it meant that I could hand off tasks that previously I personally had to do, and then I could also help that person develop in other ways as well.
mm.
And in my head for the previous 2 months, I've been going, I have to do this. It's my job. It's my responsibility. Everyone's counting on me. Again, the stories I tell myself. And yet we got a much better outcome when I spoke to someone, and they actually thought higher of me for seeking the help, having that difficult conversation. And the outcome for the business was better because we achieved the projects as we intended to. You know, and that was better for the client. It was better for my company. It was better for the team because I wasn't loading them in the same way. It's not great for the team when 9 p.m. I'm sending emails out about what I expect the next day. But that's the time I had because I was so
And I
so
suppose
loaded.
that sets some boundaries for the future projects, because then the person's thinking, oh, actually, if we put this project in, we've got to think about what support we're going to get, so we don't have that scenario again. And
Yes, absolutely. And one of the really interesting things that I found when I did that is I realized, and this sounds really obvious, but it's not something you think about at the time. I'm not the only person going through that.
mm,
Many others do, very likely, including my boss
mm,
at some point in their past. So not only will they empathize with it, but they'll be able to give me useful advice and some help towards moving in the right direction.
mm,
Um, yeah, and once you've shared it, you realize that you're not on your own. that's, I think, that first step, sharing it. One of the things I've also suggested to other people is that if you see one of your colleagues who's struggling for the same reason, take them out for a walk, go and grab a coffee with them, get them out the office for 15 minutes and just ask them if they're all right, talk to them about some non-work stuff, whatever you take needs to strike up that conversation, and see if you can get them to open up, because it may be that all that person needs is that little tap on the shoulder that says, it looks like you're struggling a bit, do you need some help? And then they're ready to open.
There's the it should be on my shelf behind somewhere, but the my original copy from probably 30 odd years old now, my copy, you can just see it in my thing, the Stephen R. Covey.
Yeah.
And so habit 5 for me was a real big one about seek first to understand before you understood.
Oh, yes.
That for me, in terms of when I was a leader managing
Yeah.
my staff, went from, managing 10 people, 5 people to selling 10 people, and then managing like over 100 people. That was something that really held me at the time, because and it was understanding like things like my thinking, like what football teams did they support, were they married, because before it, when
Yeah.
someone is, it's like yeah, I don't know anything. I don't know if they're, one of my senior managers that works with me, I don't know if they're married,
Yeah.
how many kids they got, what their kids' name is.
No.
And it's funny how it's had that made such a big change, but then the impact it had on go is like now, even with my clients, I understand a lot more of their kids and their things are more, whereas before it would be a very closed book. But
Yeah.
actually, just on its own, or seek first to understand before you understood, was just such a, like you said, just such pepper would be just going out for a walk or whatever like that. But I think, like what you said, there's an element there, maybe people take on their own responsibility around with their boss and just say, look, can we go for a coffee? Can we go,
Yeah.
and maybe put their feelings out there a little bit like that, and not necessarily, because the problem is with people, I think, a little bit of when, particularly in the work life, when you've got a boss and they just like, well, not everyone's a good leader.
No.
They've been put in that position, and they, like you said, they've got their own challenges and their own
Yeah.
things going on, and they might not realize how they're making you feel or whatever because of their own things. And it's kind of responsibility there that you can do it 2 ways, can't you? And say, well, actually, can we go out for coffee and talk? So I need to share with you how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think that's really good what you put out, like understanding that their boss might have their own problems as well and be feeling the same, and being happy to share it. In terms of the when we life, life throws this stuff at us, and I think everyone will kind of relate back to the COVID thing, because it was a worldwide phenomenon, which was,
Yeah.
in a way that everyone can relate to, in terms of how much it threw such a curveball in people's lives. Um, and then, and a new norm has come out of that, and whatever, and we're still kind of, if you like, dealing with unpacking what that really meant to all different
Yeah.
generations. But when life throws a spanner or unexpected challenge in like maybe an illness, families, changes, business, not, business they work for going out of
Yeah.
business. Um, how should people adapt their work-life balance when they get that life moment thrown at them?
Well, I think firstly, that would depend whether it was a work spanner or a home spanner.
Yeah.
In either case, the solution is similar, but the implementation would be a bit different. So if you've got a personal problem, illness in your family, or something that's going wrong that you need to address, then suddenly that becomes that's where you're putting your energy, that's where you're putting your focus. At which point your boundaries from work have got to be even more strict than they were before, because you need the time and energy to do that. Now, I think we're lucky that in the UK, our labour laws are fairly good, in that I can go to my boss and say, I've got this issue, I need some time off, and I'm likely to get it.
They
There
might
are
not,
other,
they might feel weird about is that going to affect my career? Is that going to, there's all these other stuff that comes into play with that, isn't there?
There's always a trade-off.
Yeah.
Uh, and some people wouldn't want to go, can I go, can I reduce my hours for the next month, or can I have a couple of weeks off at short notice, because it feels like a weakness.
Mm.
But the reality is it's not a weakness, it's a strength, showing how you are able to cope and deal with things and compartmentalize them, so that you can go, right, when I'm focusing on work, this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to do a great job. Away from that, there are these issues at home that I want to solve. Now, the flip side could be it's something that's gone on at work. One of your colleagues has suddenly gone off long-term sick, workloads shot through the roof, and until that issue can be resolved in a more long-term situation, you are going to need to step in and do more work than previous. And then you can agree what might be a change to your boundaries, that will, okay, I will take on 2 clients from Bob from my team, work from them. It means I'm going to have to do an extra 8 to 10 hours work a week to cover that, but it's a limited period until such time as Bob comes back, or there's a replacement, or the other tasks I've got can be moved off to realign. So again, you can accept the extra responsibility, but there's a caveat that it's time limited. It's not there just for an inordinate amount of time until the situation happens to resolve itself or doesn't. But that would also need to be agreed in your home life as well. Now, that's easy for an individual person, but that also has an impact on someone's family as well. So your partner, your children also need to understand that for a period of time you may be less available, and understand that that's the situation. So again, in either side, it's about having firm boundaries and understanding how you can implement them. But there's a difference, I think, as to whether it's a work or a home crisis as to which is driving that particular behavior. Again, on the work side, those tend to come up quite regularly, and they tend not to be as severe. On the home side, hopefully they don't come up very regularly, but when they do, they can be critical. Your parent, you suddenly realize, your dad's gone into hospital or whatever, and I need to put some time in here in a way that I couldn't. And maybe you don't live with your parents anymore, so you're having to you've either gone you're either traveling, or you've gone back to your parents' house to spend a few weeks looking after your mum while your dad's in hospital, or supporting your mum while your dad's in hospital, whatever it is. Those tend to be more critical. And I do think in those circumstances, communication and clear boundaries is the way to define it. But also having that right mindset to be able to do that from a positive point of view, and to realize that people won't think less of you for doing it. Your career isn't going to be adversely affected because you're taking care of a sick relative for a period of time. People will probably respect you for making that decision. And what you'll also find is that your time management improves around what you are doing when you're in work, because you'll be far more clear about, right, this is the time I've got. So I'm going to do these things in this time, right? And then I'm going to delegate these other activities that I might otherwise have been doing. It gives you that clearer focus on that as well.
Very interesting. And so that's really, really thoughtful, actually. I think that would help a lot of people actually with that mindset and that, put it that way. So with you talk about, like, so putting in boundaries and like both sides in personal life and even with yourself around as work life.
Yeah.
How, so a little bit of what I took from what you were saying for a few questions there about boundaries have to be a little bit fluid. But
Yeah.
how often should we review what boundary we put, so like You know, I suppose that I've got a boundary that I've had for a long time now, which I don't take any calls anything like before 11 a.m. because it's my
Yeah,
time, and unless I choose to and say, right, oh, we can meet at 10
yeah,
time.
yeah,
But how often should we, if we accept that boundaries need to be fluid,
yeah,
personal, business, with ourselves, even if we're single and introvert with ourselves and
yeah.
other family as well, members, um, how often should we review our boundaries? Is there kind of a process you go through with your clients around?
So I haven't put it on a formal basis like that.
Mm,
I've said that they should be reviewed. Um, I my gut answer to that question would be initially every 3 months,
mm,
but once you're more comfortable with them, longer, maybe six to 12 months, depending on how well structured you are around it.
mm,
Uh, just on a similar point, earlier to you, I read out what was my first boundary I wrote.
mm,
The last boundary I have on my list, and I'm just reading it now, is when a boundary is breached, I will have a clear plan in place to reset the situation.
mm.
Uh, because you have to accept that sometimes things will impact on your boundaries, and
Yeah.
it's the right choice to move in one direction or the other. But when that is, you need a way of resetting.
Mm.
But either reinserting that boundary as it is, moving it temporarily, or changing that boundary based on different circumstances.
Yeah. So there's a real level of self-awareness that's got to come into play.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that was the last one I added because I realized that when I did my review, I had breached a number of them,
Right.
and they'd moved without me intending them to.
Right.
So it was that point of essentially of having that reset.
Mm.
Um, Now, I probably look at my own boundaries. It's not on a regular basis, but maybe an average of once a year or so.
Yeah.
Um, but I would suggest for someone who's going through this process, building up that mindset, doing it more regularly, because you will get pushed back on some, and then you'll also get the opportunity to think, actually, that one's not quite working for me. I'm going to change it. Oh, I'm going to add a new one. So have it once you've set those boundaries, that's not it done.
Yeah.
That's how it
Okay.
is now.
Yeah.
And then at the next review, you might go, well, that one I just can't stick to regularly, but I'm going to adapt it in this way. Or now I think about it, there's something else I need to add.
Mm.
Um, So again, one of the ones I added later in my cycle of putting boundaries in place was being communicative to other people about what my boundaries were.
Mm.
They weren't just boundaries for me; they were boundaries that I was. Yeah, I didn't go around and say these are my boundaries. Do not cross them.
Yeah.
That would be quite aggressive of me.
Yeah.
But by letting people know in a more casual way,
Yeah.
people stopped trying to impose things on me that would cross them,
Yeah.
because they started to respect that my own boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting
So
because
that, mm,
the one thing that's really helped me with my family is
mm,
I'm really clear with them around what my day is, you know.
yeah,
Um, so when they come, my wife needs to, or the kids need to book something, they know that they, you know, really after 11 o'clock, they're going to struggle. They know that I play golf every Wednesday and every Friday. So they know that you know, that's things, but I've been
mm,
really strong around weekend is family times. But when they're booking stuff, they know like when they can book it because of really kind of, you know, almost like in my old days, this is my weekly, you know, schedule. By the way, you know, it's like
yeah,
today, for example, you know, it's like, right, um, you know, we was having a cup of tea and I said, right, I'm gonna be in the office, so kind of from about sort of 11 o'clock onwards, so probably finish about sort of half three, come out, whatever like that. And then, and it'd be, you know, and I said, you know, a couple of like, obviously with this podcast is particularly between half one and 3 o'clock, I can't be, you know,
mm,
I am recording, so don't, you know, it is a definite do not disturb. Um,
yeah,
but we, but yeah, but there is that communicating of it, isn't it, as well? And
Yes.
yeah. So when if someone's really saying, well, I need to set some boundaries or stuff like that.
Mm.
How I know we talked about the last question about being fluid and reviewing them, but what
Yeah.
about looking at them when you first set them 10 years ago? Like how,
Yeah.
because can you, if you leave it too long, so say for example, you think, well, I'll review them in 3 months' time, you put a thing in your
Yeah.
calendar 3 months' time.
Yeah.
But then when you review them, you go, well, I didn't keep to that one, I didn't keep to that one, I didn't
Yeah.
keep that one work well. So how is there kind of like is it like a habit of daily sort of like how often do I look at these boundaries to know if they're working or not working?
So what I did and what I would recommend is to print them off and have them near your computer at home
Mm,
until they are things that you don't need to look at to remember what they are anymore. Have that visual reminder.
yeah,
And that obviously is beneficial if you're working at home, less if you're in an office because you don't really want to go and pin them on your desk in the office. That can again seem a little bit aggressive.
yeah,
Um, but if you've got that opportunity to have that reminder, so you're not going and making a habit of right, it's at 8:55 in the morning, I'll read my boundaries before I start my job,
yeah,
but they're there and they just become part of how you operate. And that's something that's a technique I use in lots of ways. If there's something I'm trying to build into my day, if there's lessons I'm trying to learn in terms of personal growth, I will have them pinned up around me until I absorb them, and I don't need those reminders anymore to build those habits.
yeah. It's a bit like when we sort of set affirmations for ourselves, isn't it? And that after a couple of days that they come natural, and you don't need that reminder. You know what they
Yeah.
are, I suppose.
Mm.
As you could call. So with the it's just we've kind of gone from balance work life and burnout, but I think this is why obviously got attracted to this topic because they're very
Mhm.
connected.
Yeah.
Uh, because I imagine, and I'm thinking about people that I've known over a long time in the years, and from my corporate days particularly around,
Mm.
and even from afterwards with clients stuff like that. Viewing, but the burnout is quite a big the work life balance. Not having that is a big contribution to the burnout. Either
Mm.
way, I suppose, isn't it? Because there can be pressures, like you
Of course
said,
it is.
on
Yeah.
your personal life from a family illness example,
Yeah.
and you haven't managed that very well and how it affects your work, and you're trying to juggle
Yeah.
the two. Or like you said, like there's something like turned up at work like a big project, and then you're not being so
Mm.
that lack of having that work life balance then creates that that burnout, if you like, from
Yes, it does.
yeah. And so what would be daily, I mean, is that something that you work at? And when someone comes to you being
Mm.
that title of a burnout coach, you'd be like, there's someone comes to you going like, I'm struggling with burnout, whether I've been told to
Yeah.
talk to you, or a company brings you in to deal with their leadership
Mm.
quality, whatever.
Yeah.
The is that balancing work life something that you is quite early on that you would kind of what is your burnout?
Um, yes, it is. I mean, I think it's one of the critical things uh, to avoid burnout. And I'll try and keep the conversation on the work-life balance bit for this portion of the conversation. Uh, but I think having that right work-life balance is critical, uh, and the benefits that they're there for everybody
Yeah.
because the individual feels that they're getting the time for the things that are important to them. They're actually able to focus on, yeah, things that perhaps they've neglected, or it's quite common perhaps for fathers to not spend as much time with their children as they like. But yeah, if you get the
A
work-life
little bit of
balance
that has
right.
been there. So I mean,
Mm.
I was guilty of that in my first child. I think
Yeah,
it's I always talk about it's been the gap of 9 years between my second and my third child has meant that I've had a do over with my third child and
yeah,
things. But it was interesting that was a condition from my not seeing my dad a lot because he was at
Yeah,
work and he was at work
yeah,
before when I worked before I
yeah.
woke up and come home when I was just going to sleep. There was a lot
Mm.
of I convinced myself, well, that was okay because that's how it is supposed to be.
Yes,
Yeah.
that it's down back to those stories we tell ourselves.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the story I learned. That's how I will repeat, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody. But I think being able uh, to set to set that work-life balance so that you've got the opportunity to focus on things that are important for you, it's really good for the individual, but it does also have benefits for the organization as well, because what they get when that person is in work is someone who's focused, productive, happy, because they know that they're respected. They're more likely to stay in that organization, so
Right.
your recruitment retention is easier, and those people are more likely to go on and have good careers in that organization than if the work-life balance is not there. A lot of people who go through burnout, for example, they may come back to that job, but then they'll look to move to something different because they
Mm.
want a different set of environment afterwards. So you lose a person that you've invested a lot of time and energy into, and has a lot of knowledge of your organization, uh, because you've not been supporting them in the way that they needed to.
Mm.
Now, one of the key things I find in terms of building that work-life balance is taking the time, scheduling the time for yourself first.
Right.
And this is a common theme in terms of self-development, but putting that time in for you first. So if you need something, it goes in your calendar. If you can be flexible without having to be prescriptive, there are different methods for different people. But if I if I need something, and particularly now I'm in a more flexible environment in terms of coaching, if I want to spend a couple of hours at the gym, I can schedule that in. That's my time, and I'm good with that.
Mm.
I want to go and pick my son up from school. That's scheduled. That time's clear, and it's there for me to do that the way I want it, and then I can build everything around that.
Mm.
If I don't build that in first, there's the temptation is the work will take over everything. It will take all the time available, and then there won't be the time for me to do the things that I need.
I suppose as a leader as
So,
well, if you're a leader in a business or an
yeah,
organization and you're setting that standard for yourself, then the culture is gonna drop down to employees.
I,
But if you're the
yeah,
opposite, then whatever you say, the culture
yes,
is going to be led by your actions, I suppose, as a leader. If you're
yeah, absolutely.
either one way or the other, too much personal life or too much work life, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. It's back to that key word of balance.
yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're a leader in an organization, it's down to you to set the culture of how things operate. And I saw that in the corporate world when we got back from COVID. I noticed a lot of the leaders were back in the office full time
Mm.
because that's what they liked doing. And it drove the culture that people had to get back in the office because that's where they were seen, that's where work took place. And actually, what we then saw was a divergence between those who wanted to carry on with the lifestyle that they'd grown into over the
Yeah.
previous year
It's
or
been a
two.
new norm. Yeah.
Yeah. And those who felt obliged to go back because their boss was back.
Mm.
So that culture you have of having that right balance and taking the time to show that you can service your own needs as well as the needs of the company. I think that's really important in making sure that not just you have that work-life balance, but you're projecting that further down and across your organization.
So if well, they're saying if you're an organization, whether you're a leader or you're working an organization where
Mm,
there's big element of remote working, so working from home,
yeah.
is it, in your opinion, is it harder or easier to set a work-life balance when you're at the office? You are full-time back in the office, because there is a lot of stuff around. It's very current at the moment. I think there's a lot of thoughts around, or people rejigging that. Do they have all
Yeah,
of the, initially it was, yeah, we allow remote working because it's cheaper, but now they're
yeah,
people saying no, actually we want them. And I think Elon Musk has put his two pennies in recently around it.
yes.
Everyone should be working, going to work, and including the leaders. Um, yeah, is there a feel for you of it? Is it easier or harder if there is no remote working, or if it?
So personally, I really like remote working.
Hmm.
And in one of my previous roles, I was responsible for determining how my organization created that new normal for 11,000 people.
Right.
So look, we dealt with a whole host of issues, and there's a whole different podcast around that. But um, remote working is not going away. It's a very popular and can be a very productive way of working,
Mm.
but it has its limitations as well.
Mm.
It's harder to get hold of people than you are if you're in the same office. Yeah, I can just walk two desks down, tap someone on the shoulder, speak to them for a minute, and I've got my answer.
Mm.
Whereas remote, I might send them a message, but it may be maybe 2 hours before I get a reply.
Yeah.
Um,
I think about people businesses that have gone, oh, we can go remote because we save this amount of money. We don't.
yeah,
There's that, but then there's probably very few that have thought about that. Well, if we're going to do this, we need to talk to our employees about setting boundaries, about
yeah,
life balance.
uh, absolutely. And we touched on earlier the what do you do during the time that you were previously commuting,
Mm.
and having some boundaries about personal time in that area is really good.
Mm.
I spoke recently with a guy who was a senior leader in a company, and when he'd gone in, meetings could be anywhere from 7:30 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, and he'd instigated strict boundaries for himself, and he expected other people to follow.
Mm.
That meetings took place between 9 and 5. There would be rare occasions where something
Yeah,
required,
emergency.
urgent, something urgent, but there would be no routine or ordinary meetings within that period.
Mm.
And if you invited him to one, he would not attend. Um, and that cultural view meant that you knew that during 9 to 5,
Mm.
you would largely need to be available for work meetings. And again, you've got that opportunity to be a bit flexible here and there, especially if you're working remotely.
Mm.
But you're putting that boundary in, and you're making it clear so that it doesn't grow.
Mm.
Um, in the office, it is easier to have those time-bound boundaries because you're commuting, you've got to get home, so you might stay late, but there's a limit. Whereas when you're working remotely, it can go on quite a lot.
Mm.
I've done a lot of work in project environments where you're coming close to a deadline, and therefore, uh, you know, people are still, you can see it, in their status, they're still online at 7, 8 o'clock at night because there's work that needs to be finished.
Mm. Interesting.
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
with my VAs that I employ, and
Mm,
they're all remote because they're um, in other countries.
mm,
Um, and it's interesting where some of them have worked before for other people, and they found it quite um, refreshing, if you like. My take on it is that I don't care when you work,
yeah,
and I don't care if it's, if you're a night owl and you get more work done between 12 and 2 a.m.
yeah,
And then I don't care. I say I want to more focus on that the tasks are done. And as far as I'm
yes,
concerned, is the task and the stuff that we set out can be done within that time that they're getting paid for, right? So I took the view of, if it gets done,
yeah,
because I don't want to get, I didn't want to get, a part of it was my own boundaries, I suppose, that I didn't want to get into a daily checking, are you working, what you're doing, etc. I very
Yeah,
much left under their call. Like whenever you start your work, you put in the WhatsApp group, you know, you're starting in brief. So
yeah,
you down to you, and I was like, and I don't care when you work.
mm,
I'm just more concerned about these tasks are done
yeah,
within the time frame that we set them. And if
yeah.
that's and I very much said to the start, you know, that I said to my start, if that isn't fair, you need to tell me now,
Yeah,
because that's the only problem we're going to have. And it's funny
yeah.
how they found that very refreshing, but I'm not. I don't know if that's the right or wrong way, but
So
I don't have
yeah.
to manage daily the process, if you like, of where they are at and what they're doing.
Mm. So I think that's a very good way of working where you can narrow things down to individual tasks like that. It's a little harder where you're in a more collaborative environment where someone else is depending on your work, or
Yeah.
you're working directly with other people, um, or in a more corporate environment where there's a meetings culture.
Mm.
But if you've got a series of tasks, and this is the way I've defined my own role as well. There are tasks that need to be done by me. There are tasks that need to be done by other people, and if they're done in a timely manner, that's great. You know, I don't need to know exactly when they were done. I don't need to know how long it took you to do it. I gave you the task, you did it. I
Yeah.
did my own time,
Yeah,
my
the
own
only thing
task. I
that's
need it.
this conversations made me think about that
Yeah,
my pad tablet here, that I could be that could as great as that sounds, and a lot of people might look at it and go, oh, I wish, you know,
yeah,
VA's working with I wish I had that, you know, that thing with but the I suppose the other side of just thinking about it is that I want to look at is if they're not good at managing their time, then they could get a
mm,
situation where they get, say, to Friday,
yeah,
they haven't done anything because of the relaxed sort of environment, if you like,
yeah,
and now their personal work life balance has gone to pot because they've got to do a 12-hour day
yes,
now, or for 14-hour
yeah.
day to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, there's some key skills that you have to make that sort of working environment work efficiently.
Mm.
You've got to have trust with it for the other person.
Yeah.
Um, you've got to have a professional attitude,
Mm.
so no one takes the mick and goes, "All right, okay, I'm supposed to be working, but I'm going to go off and spend the day shopping or golfing or whatever." Um, yeah, and you also have to have a relatively strong view around procrastination, because
Mm.
if I give you 5 tasks and you wait until Friday afternoon to start them, you've hit that point of how am I going to get all this done in timescale? But if you've got someone that you trust, they're not procrastinating, that their work ethic is right, then it's a really productive way of working.
Mm. I mean, I think
And I think,
is the amount of what I've been really clear on is the deadlines, you know, if like, so
yeah,
some stuff like some of the content, but you know, where Brian Dinner and then James got, there's a real clear deadline of Jan needs that done by that time so she can do her stuff, you know,
yeah,
and so I suppose that's a bit that's um really helped it and supported it, if you like.
yeah. And there are lots of tools that can help with that, from the more formal workflow type tools to just having a Slack channel or something, or
Yeah,
a
WhatsApp. Yeah,
WhatsApp group
yeah.
where you're just saying, right, I've done this, I need this, and you all collaborate. Oh yes, I'll get on and I'll do my
Actually,
bit.
that's probably been a savior because the WhatsApp group it's their responsibility to kind of go, right, I'm starting work and I'm doing this today, and it's their responsibility. And
Yeah,
so that we know, for example, if it gets 4 days and Brian hasn't put anything on the WhatsApp group, it's like, fine, you're gonna struggle to, you know, but it makes
yeah,
it easy for me to manage, if you like, and I'm 1 minute managing rather than over, you know, if you like, try being on top of them all the time and managing. So it's quite in terms of
yeah.
that. Thing. Just content. I think this has been a really interesting conversation. I want to
Mm,
end with a final question around that, and we focus on I mean, the thing into burnout was I knew he was going to go into that, and that's been great because I think they're
Yeah,
really related. So it's really cool.
yeah,
I think it's going to help a lot of people with some stuff you've talked about, Ian.
mm,
And but in terms of balance, work-life balancing, so can you
yeah,
share some practical strategies, or mainly more particularly, I think, because a lot of coaching was is like habits, if you like,
yeah,
daily habits that, well, it can be daily or weekly,
yeah.
whatever. But some strategies and daily habits that have helped you and help your clients with a better work-life balance or something.
Sure. So the first one is something I've already touched on, and that is scheduling time for yourself first.
Mm,
Putting in your diary the things that you need, and then building your work around that. Now that's far more easy where you've got some flexibility over your day than in a traditional structure. But even in a traditional structure, there's always opportunities for you to do that. Even if it's as simple as I'm going to block out my lunch hour
mm,
so that during my lunch hour, I can go and do the thing I want. I can go and have lunch away from the office. I can go for a walk. I can, I can sit and listen to a podcast. I can, whatever you want to do, that's your time.
mm. I think
So
with a lot of
everyone,
coaches,
yeah,
sorry, people watching, coaches that are watching this that are, solopreneurs and stuff like that.
yeah,
Um, I use Calendly link. I know there's a lot of different versions and all that.
yeah,
That I talk about a lot in my videos around the Calendly link that I use, and I
mm,
very much I just linked it with my Google Calendar
yeah,
so that I block things out in that calendar. People can't book it, and so very much limits the people. I don't get. I think it's very easy to get caught. You got a whole plan, but then someone books in a thing, and I can't do that now because someone's booked in at 12 to 2 and whatever like that. But it's in managing that. Look, there's always a system, isn't there, that can help you with that. Uh,
yes,
I've
there is,
run
yeah,
Calendly and that Google Calendar so that I
yeah,
know I can manage it. So um if Nicole says, "Oh, I need you to, help me out or something like that," whatever like that, I say, "Well, I've got all right, or can we go for lunch?" And I can like I'll put that into my calendar so I know no one can book into it and
yeah,
derail. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
carry on. I'll do.
I do this. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing I'd build in is practicing self-care on a regular basis. So a tip, if you like, is I try to avoid putting meetings in that are round numbers, so 30 minutes or a full hour. I always try and make sure that I leave them 5 minutes short. So 25 minutes or 50 minutes, 55 minutes if I have to. That means I do have a little bit of flexibility to go over if I need to, but it also means I've got that 5 minutes to get up, stretch my legs, um, make myself a cup of tea, come back, and I'm fresh and ready for the next meeting instead of just going from one to the next.
Mm.
Um, if I,
Yeah.
you know, and just that very simple thing, again, if you're working from home, it's that chance to nip down, see your partner. I'm making a cup of tea. Do you want one?
Yeah.
Again, you've got that little outside
It's like
bursting.
really interesting you say that because I do something which I probably don't realize how effective it is, but you saying that in our conversation days where that I have a 5 minute buffer before the meetings.
Yeah,
It's a 25-minute buffer. And I've set this up in Calendly, the 25
yeah,
minute afterwards, because the thing that derailed me early on was we've got here to 3 o'clock and I've got someone who's already booked in for 3 o'clock. So
yeah,
I've got to end this quickly now because you go, oh Christ, by the way, I've got another call, I've got to go. Sorry.
yeah,
So I quickly put in a 5 minute buffer beforehand and 25 minutes. So it works out that
yeah,
really there's a half hour
yeah,
leeway. I mean, and I only having this conversation realized actually simple thing, but it's had a really good because again, we end on time. I know I've got 25 minutes to go out and do some grounding or make a cup of tea and just put
yeah,
my head in and just say hi, and like, and do you want
yes,
a tea? And like I said, so that's
yeah,
very valuable. That
yeah. And the final bit of advice I give is to get outside. When you get a chance, get outside. So it's something I like to do as early in the morning as possible. and I have I keep chickens. So
Cool.
first thing in the morning, I go downstairs, put the kettle on, and I go out and feed the chickens.
Yeah.
And it just gives me 2 or 3 minutes of fresh air, some sunlight on my face, and I feel better for it. And it's another thing that I can do when I've got gaps that I've built into my schedule. I'm not just sitting in the same room at the same chair all day. I can get outside, I can have that fresh air, I can feel some nature around me,
Mm.
and that I find makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I like grounding because I try
Yeah.
to do it 5 minutes for twice a day because just feeding, I'm kind of lucky with my garden if you like, I've got fields around it, but just feeding
Mm.
the natural earth under your feet,
Yeah.
whatever weather, is there's something very calming about it for me, and so
Yeah, I like that as well.
yeah. Um, I think that's a good way to end because it's some really good habits. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
And how long? I think we're about an hour and 20 minutes, something like that, into hold it. But the thank you for your time. Thank you for all the insights you've given. Um, and anyone watching this, who want to come in the description, wherever you're watching this, will be details if you want to get in contact with Ian. And yeah, I can probably be a part two come up soon. There's a few things where I thought we could have gone into another realm and all that. So there might be a part two, a series two or something like that. We're going to part twos, but really great for your time. I think it's a wonderful conversation, Ian.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's been lovely talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Cheers.